Black History Month occurs every year during the month of February and is a time to honor those who have helped African Americans gain rights and African American movements that have shaped our country today. Arguably, one of the most influential times for African American advancement and culture was the 1920s during the Harlem Renaissance. During this time, Black artists, writers, and musicians flourished and were given the opportunity to express their culture to other Americans, and it all began with a movement called the Great Migration. The Great Migration took place between 1910 and 1970, during which nearly 6 million African Americans moved to northern and midwestern urban cities. The reasons behind these movements vary, although the biggest causes were poor farmland and the increase of industrial factories during World War I, leading African Americans to search for job opportunities in the North. Another cause was the brutality of Jim Crow laws and racism in the South during this time. The migration of Black Americans to the North caused a mesh of culture in these urban cities, one of the most influenced being Harlem, New York. The Great Migration caused an influx of African Americans in the North. However, Black culture was able to flourish due to an economic prosperity following World War I. This time is known today as the Roaring Twenties and is referred to as one of the most influential movements of culture, art, music, and literature in African American history. Although centered in Harlem, this movement had a nationwide effect on Americans' view on Black culture. Americans in the 20s experienced the birth of jazz and blues music, which became an international craze and is still popular today, and new styles in abstract painting also became popular. The stock market crash and the start of the Great Depression took place in 1929, thus ending the golden era of the Harlem Renaissance. There were many people who shaped the start and outcomes of the Harlem Renaissance. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote articles published in The Crisis and inspired many Black families to move north for job opportunities and to escape white supremacists in the South. Langston Hughes, probably the most recognizable name from this time, was an American poet who influenced both the Harlem Renaissance and the Civil Rights Movement. Zora Neale Hurston was one of the biggest female writers in the 20s. She shined a light on the struggles of being a Black woman in America. Aaron Douglas depicted life during the Harlem Renaissance through his art and caused a rise of cultural abstract art. Louis Armstrong was one of the biggest jazz influencers in Harlem. His music is still listened to today. The Cotton Club was a nightclub and bar in Harlem where Black artists such as Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, one of the biggest Black female singers at the time, and other artists performed. The Harlem Renaissance was cut short due to economic crisis that occurred in 1929. However, its impact has lasted for decades. The optimism and African American pride that grew in the 20s stuck throughout the Great Depression and led to many protests and riots in the North. It set a pathway for the Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and 60s, which gave African Americans many opportunities and rights. Black people who were previously viewed as lower and incompetent were now seen by America as sophisticated, creative, educated, and inspirational due to the effects of the Harlem Renaissance. This time period of expansion for Black culture, music, art, and literature changed America in many ways.